Okay, Amanda. Are you going to sit there?
I am.
All right. Do we want to condense? I think, yeah.
Well, it's easier for me to move than
Yeah, that would be cool.
a guy like this. So. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Randy. Now the mayor's gonna make me behave finally for once.
Call to order for Watertown City Council work session for March 7th, 2023. It is not on your agenda, but we are going to rise while Councilman Vilhauer leads us in prayer.
I came across something yesterday on the internet that I thought was very appropriate in light of our meeting tonight, and I'll take the easy way out and read this prayer. It's a prayer for unity. God of peace, we invite you to preside over this meeting. Even if we have different opinions, give us unity of spirit. Help us to each listen politely as others share their points of view. Help us to work as a unified team in combining ideas for a great outcome. Help us to work as a whole rather than as individuals trying to promote their own agendas. May we have a spirit of camaraderie in this room and work together on our shared mission. And all God's people said, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Finance Officer Bob Zine, call the roll.
Okay. Bueller. Bueller. Danforth. Absent. Helene.
Here.
Paulson. Shuddy.
Here.
Tupper.
Here.
Vilhauer.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. With that, the chair will entertain a motion to approve today's agenda.
So moved.
Motion made by Councilman Shuddy, seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. On the regular agenda, we have one item, a City Hall and street facility discussion. We'll kick it straight over to our city manager, Amanda Mack, to lead the way.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. We have spent the last several months, as you all are aware, reviewing, vetting, looking at the two, what we would consider final pieces of the city infrastructure projects, the City Hall project and street maintenance facility, and trying to determine what a recommendation to you all would be on the best path forward for both of those facilities. A little bit of background, as you all are aware, in 2021, the council at the time issued a bond, $15 million bond, to purchase the Wells Fargo building and renovate it for the City Hall portion of that. For $5 million, they allocated $7.5 million of that $15 million for the street facility project, and the last $2.5 million was for the 10th Avenue North reconstruct project. So we have completed 10th Avenue North, and now we are at a point where we need to make some decisions and have some more in-depth conversation about the City Hall and street facility projects. We, as you are also aware, put the Wells Fargo Wells Fargo project out to bid in June or July, right, of 2022. And the bids came back about $2.5 million higher than the engineer's estimate. As a reminder, we had come to the council prior to putting that project out to bid and asked to increase the budget by $1 million based off the estimates that we were receiving at the time. So the actual bid that we received was $3.5 million over the original estimate for the renovation of that building. Once we received the bids, you all gave us the direction to negotiate with the bidder to see if we could find some wiggle room within those numbers. We found a lot of things that we could take out of that bid, and we'll dive into that a little bit further into the presentation. Ultimately, the recommendation that we made to you all was to reject the bids outright, because we felt that the number of things that would need to be taken out of the bid to bring it within budget was very detrimental to the integrity of the project, and largely were things that were going to be that were needed to be added in the future. So roofing, council chambers, things like that. So since that time, we have been diving into the numbers. We've been exploring what options might be available, which has led us here tonight, where we're going to present some information on a renovation of the Wells Fargo building and a separate street maintenance facility, and also consideration of a city services center. So combining all of those operations into one facility at the site on Highway 20. So with that, our Public Works Director has spent quite a bit of time, along with our Finance Officer, putting together this presentation. We're going to present the information. We're happy to answer questions as you have them, or if you want to wait until the end, however you want to handle that, Mayor, is fine with us. I'd like to reiterate that we are just presenting information at this time. There's no decision to be made this evening, and ultimately whatever decision is made is that of the councils, and staff will appropriately respond and implement any decision that does get made. So with that, Heath, would you like to kick it off and we'll go from there?
Chair will recognize our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye, and I would like to instruct the council that I do think it's appropriate to ask questions during the slide so that you don't have to wait until the end and possibly forget a question, and then it also makes the questions more germane to the slide at the time. If I feel something is going on a little too long, I hope that the council will recognize that for expediency, I might just quit conversation if we're being redundant at that point, because we can have further conversation upon the larger issue at the end. So, Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. And if I heard you right, I think I heard that Heath has a lot of technical jargon in here. If you got to push pause on me, feel free.
Actually, we have our first question. Apparently you're off to a rocky start. Councilman Vilhauer.
Will this presentation be on the website after this evening?
It will be. We can make sure it's uploaded. Okay. It is being streamed through our Facebook page and the website currently.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, to follow up with Manager Mack's comments, there's been a lot of work that's gone into the data I'm going to share here in this slideshow. This slideshow is not meant to overwhelm anybody, but simply share the facts, share the data on where we're at today with these two facilities. There's a lot of data in here, but there's also a lot of pictures and graphs and things of that nature. Some of the information later on is of financial nature that work closely with Kristen Bobsey, the Finance Director, on, and she'll help chime in on those slides at that time as well. So a little bit of history on the City Hall building, the current one, and the reason I'm sharing some of this is just to simply tell the story, how Watertown has gotten where we have with these two facility needs, and how we've progressed those needs through several processes to get them to where they are today. So this original building that we're in was originally, the southerly portion of this building was built in the 1930s-ish. So we didn't have any definitive data that showed us exactly when. We do know that in 1954 there was an addition added to the north. Of course, the facility was used as for other business purposes prior to the city acquiring it in 1974. We have since housed City Hall in this structure since 1974. Since that date, we've had a few improvement projects related to the HVAC systems, ADA improvements with the elevator on the north end of the building, some space needs additions and remodels, some minor and fairly major expenses throughout those years. Currently, there are 29 full-time employees that are housed in City Hall. Of course, they include the finance department, the HR department, city administration with the city manager, mayor, and attorney, the IT department, and then 2 divisions of public works, being engineering and community development. I think I hit everybody there. So of those departments, 29 FTEs. We're in about 15,000 square feet of usable space between the main level and the upper level. There's another roughly 7,600 square feet in the basement that's used for miscellaneous storage. You know, a total of a little over 22,000 square feet if you include the basement square footage. Some of the necessities in the building that have occurred over the years or that have sparked interest or discussion We've had mold testing done a couple different times due to the conditions in the basement. We've had radon testing on the facility. As of recently as 2023, just this year, the police chief and his team performed a security assessment on the access to the building. And that was really a good comprehensive look at access from a safety standpoint, not just in general to the building as it pertains to getting in and out of it, but just access to certain departmental areas like the finance office, like the offices upstairs, the city manager's office, and all those areas, really, and how that compares to what otherwise would be considered a safety standard of today, considering a government facility like this. So we appreciate the chief's efforts on that. The city manager has a copy of that assessment if any of the council would like to see that at some point, or maybe it's been shared unbeknownst to me. So ongoing needs, new roofing on the facility, updated fire suppression system, HVAC again is due for an upgrade, lighting upgrades, restrooms, electrical. The list goes on. Some of these are not tangible, but from a operational standpoint, the workflow in this facility is simply not as accommodating as a city hall could be. So there's all those things like that have come up over the years. Again, sharing information with the council that you already know on why we've gotten to look at doing something different. And I'm going to get into a few different slides of what we've done in the recent past related to City Hall needs. So prior to 2016, the City Hall has been on the city's budget, the long-range CIP, for a number of years, even prior to 2016. But the most sound data I could find in the engineering records that relate to us actually doing something about that in the form of design, scoping, siting, where a new City Hall might go, stems back to 2016, so 7 years ago. At that time, the mayor at the time and the city engineer worked with RS Architects, and RS Architects performed some siting analysis. They looked at this site, which is currently known as the Snow Hole, the informal slang term for that location, which is located at 1st Avenue Northwest and Kemp at that intersection there. But other sites were also considered on top of this, including the city-owned property next to the city auditorium, for example, across from the courthouse, and then a wealth of other locations. And 2016, this is the location they landed on, and we went as far as having the architect perform some floor plan layouts and some architectural renditions of what our city hall could look like. Now we'll step forward into 2019. New mayor, new administration, new staff, and we were approached at that time by a developer adjacent to the downtown Watertown Community Foundation Plaza, the downtown park. The ruins development that's currently going on there now was contemplated to be, in part, space to house a city hall. So that developer's architect provided us some architectural renditions. They too laid out some floor plans, actually 4 floors worth of floor plans. Excuse me, say that 10 times really fast. 4 floors worth of floor plans there that would go into what this blue shaded area is on this architectural rendition. This was intended to be a lease space. The city would lease that from the developer, and it was contemplated and considered and subsequently turned down as an option that the city decided not to exercise at that time. Then we fast forward to the Wells Fargo building, and that essentially transpired in 2020 and 2021. The negotiations to purchase this facility began in 2020 to the point to where we actually contracted with TSP Architects for design services. And then in 2021, we closed on that property and proceeded with the design all the way through to biddable documents. So we had plans and specifications to actually bid a full-blown remodel on the Wells Fargo building. This is simply the floor plan in the basement that included a large conference room and training room. It has a break room, an IT area for all of our IT needs, some restroom space in the basement. And then on the main level, we had a majority of the staff were housed on the main level through the series of offices that currently exist around the exterior footprint of that building. And then an interior system of cubicles that staff will be housed in.
Director Von Eye, we have a question from Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out that we actually started on the design phase of that in the fall of 2020 already, before we even had closed on the building. And that continued up until about this time 2 years ago, until mid to late March. So there were several months of designing going on even before we closed on the building.
And I think Councilman Bueller was also in on all those redesign meetings as well. I know that. I think those were the two councilmen. So, thank you. And Mayor Karen at the time. So, back to you, Director.
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize if I'm not looking up. Just shout at me and I'll press pause here. As we carried out, there were a few different iterations of the design of this remodel. One of the iterations, the initial ones, had the council chambers housed in the basement of the structure. That brought its own wealth of safety concerns and issues with ingress and egress, and also some appropriate sizing, spacing needs that we had to work through as well. So what that led to in the final design was building an addition onto the main floor level, the ground level of a city council chambers. That included a conference room, some restrooms, and of course the brunt of it was the council chambers. And that's seen in this architectural rendition here, obviously designed to match and blend in nicely with the existing structure. So once that was all complete, we were ready to go to bid, and council authorized that bid, knowing that we were in that current estimate time frame, we were already $1.3 million over our budget. Our budget was initially $5 million. Our estimate at this time, we knew going into the bid, was $6.3. So this slide shows the cost estimate dollars for the construction, which is in the gray here, these gray numbers. Oops, apologize. And then the red numbers, of course, are the actual numbers from the bid that we received for the remodel. So the base bid, that included everything that we wanted to in the design for the remodel of the main building, the current building that's there, the basement improvements, the main level improvements. There were a couple large ticket items that were held out of that bid right off the start of the design, such as the HVAC system. It was contemplated whether that should be upgraded or not with the remodel. Because of the expense, we decided not to include that in the remodel. But it is worth noting that, moving forward with that facility, while it's functioning well today, it is an aged system that at some point in the future would obviously need some kind of major rehabilitation or eventually replacement.
Excuse me, Heath, can I make a comment, Mayor? Is it okay?
Go ahead, Councilman.
All right, thank you. Just for the record, we did have a third party inspect that system and felt like it was in pretty good shape and could last a long time. And the question was posed, what difficulty might they have getting parts for that system? And they said they would not have any issues at all. They had several vendors that they could get parts from if need be. And even if we had to replace that, it wouldn't be very intrusive to the building itself if they had to replace the AC system. So I just want to make that clear. And also the person that, the maintenance person for Wells Fargo, they had their own property management group. He worked on that system. He cared for that system. He said it was well taken care of, and in his estimation, did not need to be replaced. So there were two people and a third party that said the same thing. Just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Just the point that we're making is that much like your home, at some point those things got to be replaced.
Yep, absolutely. All those facts are also true, Councilman Bueller, and really the only reason I was noting that in this presentation is just to note the age of it. I don't doubt one bit that it's running top notch right now today, but just wanted to note the age of it, because at some point, whether it's a year or 10 or 15 down the road, it's something that the city would have had to have dealt with. So that base bid with all those things came in at $3.75 million. Roughly 1.75 over the estimate. Now we also had a handful of bid alternates, where we could choose whether to or not to proceed with, along with the base bid. One of the main ones, the first one here, was to enclose the drive-through, the teller lanes out there, and capitalize on that canopy structure for some enclosed vehicle storage. That was estimated to come in at about $150,000, and the bid came in at $400,000. So again, quite a bit over what we had anticipated. Alternate number 2 was one of the more significant ones of the alternates. It was the more significant one, and that was to build that addition, the council chambers that I showed you in the previous slide. The estimate for that was about $1.2 million. The bid came in a little over $1.6 million. So about $400,000 excess there. These last two were some ancillary alternates for some minor work in and around the facility. Bottom line here, total construction estimate, again, was $3.5 million that I cited earlier. The total bid came in at 5.8. So that's that, close to $2.5 million, roughly $2.4 million over the estimate.
Director, we have a question from Councilman Tupper.
So when we look at the council chambers addition, which wasn't originally planned, that came strongly the recommendation from our police and fire department for safety reasons.
Not in addition specifically, but a recommendation to not house
yep.
the chambers in the basement.
And that was why we came up with
Correct.
the council chambers addition. Thank you.
Back to you.
So these are construction costs, construction numbers that I just went through. This next slide, I'm going to go over some of the other additional ancillary costs as far as the remodel project is concerned. Of course, we have the site purchase for $1.3 million that happened some time ago. That's a hard expense that we've already incurred. Audio video equipment throughout the new facility, the remodel facility, was to the tune of just over $500,000. Again, this has not been expended, but would have been an expense outside the construction bid that we would have had to have procured separately from that bid. Architectural engineering services, this is a hard expense we've incurred, the $300,000, along with this next one, this roughly $80,000 in testing for geotechnical and asbestos surveys on the site. And the last one here is FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And then also some high-density storage for the finance files, HR files, and several of the engineering files that we keep on record here at the city, at City Hall. That was to the tune of a little over $640,000. Total other cost, all these added up, is $2.8 million. That brings that total project estimate to that 6.3 that I referred to earlier. If you recall, our budget initially was $5 million. We went into this bid knowing our new estimate was 6.3. But after getting the bid, here's what our total project costs ended up being, just shy of $8.7 million. This last point I had on here, really the hard costs that have been expended is this $300,000 and this $80,000 on the professional services. Other than that, all this money, about $8.3 million, is money that we, in our minds, started to look at and think, could this otherwise be expended in a more proficient way for the community? And that's in part when we went into the value engineering of the bid. We wanted to look at, we took the bid into consideration and we turned it every direction we could to figure out what we could do to try to get this project still brought in a lot closer to budget. By being closer to budget, we're talking this 6.3 number that became our new budget. So this is a list of things that were explored through the value engineering. What value engineering is we work with the contractor, we work with our consultant that designed it, and then of course city staff, we all get at the table and we look at what could we modify in this project to reduce the cost. That's the value engineering component. And that's what we went through with the bidder and TSP and city staff. So one of the first ones, some of the low-hanging fruit, okay, we don't enclose the drive-throughs. We omit the vehicle storage. That was a $400,000 savings by not awarding bid alternate one. We could omit the fire suppression system. That was to the tune of roughly $200,000. There was a re-roofing component on the existing structure that would save about $150,000. Remodel on a restroom upstairs. Some of these are more nominal dollar values, but still impactful. This restroom, I believe, was the main and only restroom upstairs that we would have had to minimize some of the work on. Retaining the safety deposit door because it's quite an expense to remove. The data package, the refinishing work on some of the woodworks, you could scale back on that, you know, taking care of some of the scuffs and things like that from the use of the building. This is another larger one, but not upgrading the lighting throughout the facility, main floor and lower level. That would have pulled about $100,000 out of the project. Fire alarm system, again, another savings there. Minimizing the site work. What this is we had anticipated in the base bid to repave the parking lot, to perform some landscaping, beautification efforts in and around the facility grounds. So that could have saved another $400,000. And then one of the last ones here, you could omit alternate number 2, which was the council chambers, and that, of course, is a significant savings. So long story short is there's a litany of things here we could have taken out of that project and saved $2.5 to over $3 million from that bid. Again, that's where we, the staff through the city manager, came back to the council. After looking at this, as City Manager Mack indicated earlier tonight, it came to the point of thinking, gosh, is this really the city facility we want, with omitting all this stuff out of this bid in order to get it into within budget? And we felt we were compromising the end product to a point that'd be a detriment to the community and the long-term solution to a city hall for this community. So with that, that wraps up the City Hall discussion. How it was left was after we rejected these bids due to these circumstances that I just walked through, staff was directed to consider other alternates and what else we could do. So I'll push pause on the City Hall portion here for a little bit, and we're going to talk briefly about the street maintenance facility, because that too, of course, is the other project that's going on concurrent with this one. So I'll give a brief history of this. This is an aerial view of the street maintenance facility. It's off Arrow Avenue, just off the southwest corner of the high school. Most people are familiar with where this is at. It used to be the State Highway Department some time ago. And the history of the buildings here is the main building was built in the 1940s. These 3 westerly buildings were all built in the 50s. I got the square footages indicated on each one of these buildings. In 2002, we added a shop here for some equipment storage and heated repair type facility. And then in 2005, we added the salt sand shed. It doesn't take long to walk through or drive by or look at this facility and kind of realize we've got some needs here to be a good, strong, solid, well-functioning street maintenance operation. Given the age of these facilities, given their small size, given the choppy layout, given the confined space here on this, I believe just shy of 5-acre site, there are a lot of needs here that were highlighted over the years and have indicated it led us to why we've entertained building a new street maintenance facility. For example, one of those needs, we anticipate roughly 40,000 square feet of equipment storage needs. We're currently sitting on roughly a third of that, the 13,000 square feet. Of course, there's material storage needs. A lot of the materials, Street Superintendent Bainan ends up having to store off-site at other city site locations, which causes the equipment, the staff to have to, inefficiently run across town in different locations for certain materials depending on what it is they're working on. Admin space needs, we have about 4,000 square feet in here. Not all that is admin space, so there's shop and workspace area in this building as well. So anyway, there's a need for more admin space. Roofing, fire suppression, HVAC, some of the similar things you saw with the City Hall building are listed here as well. Now, as we started looking at street facility needs, of course, one of the first points of discussion was where do we put a new street facility. I wanted to share this map just to show that we did our due diligence over the years in considering all these red flag sites as potential locations for a new street maintenance facility. Several of them on there that were analyzed, considered, and assessed. Where do we land it? It would be this location here on Highway 20, where 10th Avenue ties into Highway 20. So in 2022, we had several things happen. One, we formally acquired this land of 27 acres to the tune of about $1.2 million. We entered into a contract with JLG Architects to begin the design of a new street maintenance facility. And we also entered into a construction manager at risk agreement with RJM. So they've been working in hand with our architect on cost estimates and layouts for the new street facility. This slide pretty much summarizes where we're at today with our cost estimate for a new street maintenance facility. This is an all-in estimate here in this column. It consists of all these items here. Construction costs, that's one of the main ones we're always looking at, but beyond the construction costs, it's always in the spotlight. There's always these other ancillary costs that come along with any construction project. You've got the escalation in here, which is pretty much a contingency in case pricing increase occurs between design and bidding. You have the design contingency for that same reason, the unknowns throughout design in case things come up we want to add. Construction contingency, that's pretty standard for any change orders that might occur through the construction phase. Contractor fees, so on and so forth. The second column over here is the Wells Fargo remodel. This is the hard cost based on the bid that we received in July of 22, the $5.8 million. With that, we also had those other additional costs for the FF&E, the audio-video equipment for the new facility, and all those other costs that have to be taken into account. The total for that is $7.3 million for the Wells Fargo remodel. So these two projects combined, if we were to carry them forward right now today, if this bid were still on the table, which it's not, we'd be looking at about $27.5 million total combined for these two projects. And I share this, and I want you to keep this slide in mind because I'm going to share it again later as a comparison to one of the proposals that we're considering. I would also emphasize that this remodel, putting my city engineer hat on, I know full well, staff knows full well, this number could look different. We could whittle items out of this project to make this number smaller. We could straight up rebid the exact same bid that we did in July and hope prices come in better. So there's a chance that this number could be reduced, this $5.8 million. What that looks like and what we'd have included in the project is what the unknowns would be until we would carry that process out. So what's next? We have a city street facility estimate. We know what the bid was on the Wells Fargo remodel. Looking at all those numbers and all the considerations, what led us to, what we were led to was a city services center option. And what does that look like? It is a facility such as this that would be incorporating the street maintenance facility and all the city hall, city administrative functions of the city, all on that location along Highway 20. This, of course, is an architectural rendition of some iterations we've gone through with them, some very preliminary work to see what that would look like in building cost estimates and designs for such a facility. This would be an east elevation view of that facility and a north elevation view, side view of that same facility. Again, where would it be housed? Again, right on Highway 20. I just put this simple picture in here to represent in relation to the city limits. So this whole yellow boundary is the current city limits, the proper city limits of the city of Watertown. And that location along Highway 20, I just wanted to use this slide to emphasize, is really very close to the geographic center of our city limits, which we knew going into citing it as the street maintenance facility location, but I think also becomes an important talking point if considering city administration, city hall functionality being performed out of here as well. Yes.
Excuse me. I know it's very preliminary, but have we had any conversation with the DOT as far as access off Highway 20, that being a state highway?
Yes, we have. We've had preliminary conversations with them about, and actually it was on this next slide, an extension of 10th Avenue, for example, and access there. There's obviously some discussion on speed limits, traffic signals, what this access looks like, having to look back around this curve that exists. But we got an initial nod and green light from them that something like that could very well be approvable. So I appreciate that question, because that's definitely one of the things that we wanted to make sure of too, as we were looking at laying this site out and some of the public infrastructure improvements we'd have to perform. This is just an example of what this site could look like. This is our full 27 acres that the city owns. I'll point out the cafe that exists here is it's under a purchase agreement, and the city has initiated discussions with that buyer and potentially doing some kind of a land swap with them. So there's a little bit of a negotiation factor that could come into play here in obtaining this section of land as well, and trade for some land up here to the north that we will not be utilizing. I wanted to point this out, this 15 acres, this bottom southerly rectangle, is really what we would focus siting our facilities on, and having adequate space for material storage on top of the structures that we need to build. This is an example layout from our architects, JLG, on what the facility layout could look like. If you can imagine, this is Highway 20 on the far right side of this drawing. Here's a future extension of 10th Avenue and a future extension of 9th. So if I go back to the zoomed out version, here's that 10th Avenue extension, here's 9th, where again we're within this 15 acre rectangle, right off the south end of the curve on Highway 20. So the building up front, of course, we would want to look nice. We'd want it architecturally to present well, as far as this being a city complex of sorts. So this was cited as Building 1, or the administrative building. This would house all the current city hall staff, along with the street divisions of Public Works, all the staff that they need office space for. Building 2 is the heated vehicle storage and repair bays. The repair bays would be included for what would be a future centralized fleet maintenance division of Public Works. Right now, to each department their own when it comes to equipment maintenance and repairs. So for a town our size, it is uncommon to not have a centralized fleet maintenance program that we would expect to go to at some point after establishing these buildings and making use of them. But otherwise, the heated vehicle storage is self-explanatory as such. It's the likely in-floor heat, but a heated storage system for the snow plows and motor graders in the winter months. To the north here, you have a cold vehicle storage building. Really, what this is it's an unheated storage building where in the winter months, when we have the plows and motor graders in the heated storage, we can put the street sweepers and some of the tractors and mowers and things like that we're not using out in the cold storage. And then vice versa in the summertime. We can put the plows and trucks and graders out here in the cold storage, and we'd have the normal shop space for the active equipment use. Also located on here is a wash bay and, of course, our important and necessary salt sand canopy that we would need. The second slide is just another rendition or layout. Again, these are preliminary. Nothing's been locked in, but we've gone far enough down a path to figure out a couple different versions that might work well. Here, the repair bays would be housed here, and your heated and cold storage next to each other. The admin space is shaped just a little bit differently depending on how council chambers and things like that were landed on the site. Another quick observation, the public parking lot would be separate from the city staff parking area for the city personnel, their personal vehicles. They'd be accessed likely through a secured gate, entry, fenced-in area, and then the public parking lot would be open to that future 10th Street extension and or Highway 20 directly. This building layout, the next screen talks about how we would plan to fund these buildings over the next few years and continue with the progression of constructing them with this fiscal phasing plan. So this top group of numbers is 2023 numbers, this current year. What are we sitting on this year? We can't perform this we prefer not to perform this project without considering a bond. So we have a without bonding scenario, and this one makes the finance officer cringe pretty heavily, I believe, if I remember right. So we also have this with bonding scenario. And you'll see the project bond is plugged in here at about $6 million. That is a rough estimate at this point. That could end up being $5 million, could it end up being $7 million. But I just wanted to note that we have a bonding option in here that's likely a necessity to truly make this work to the level of comfort that we want it to. The other numbers that we have on the funding side of things, that's all this over here on the left. The funding, we have the current street facility bond that remains at $6.7 million. The current city hall bond that remains is $3.7. We have some unrestricted reserve funds we could take out of the 212 capital improvement fund at $2.5 million. And then we have the sale of several assets. We have the existing street facility that's been appraised as of last year at $750,000. We have the Wells Fargo building. This is the purchase price that we're, I'd say fairly confident we could get back out of it based on past offers and recent discussions. We have the sale of this current building, the current city hall, for a couple $200,000 to $300,000 potentially. And we also have the sale of the surplus sale barn land, which is these acres up here that would be left for future development.
Director Von Eye, we have a question from Councilman Tupper.
You bet.
Director Von Eye, now if I understand this right, if we look at either whether we were to continue on the path of doing Wells Fargo remodel and building this separate street facility or putting them both, we would still be looking at a bond on either situation, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I think, yeah, that next slide will show just that, Councilman Tupper. The other highlights I wanted to touch on here, again, this is a phased-in fiscal phasing. So in year 23, what are we funded for? It'd be that building number 1, the street administration and city hall offices. It would be building number 2 for the heated vehicle storage and repair bays. It would be some utilities and 10th Avenue construction expenses. Now we talk about this is funding that would be in place for construction that would occur in 24. A majority of this construction wouldn't start till the spring of 24 because we have to get through the design phase yet in 23. You'll see that on another slide too with the timeline of things. So also in 2024 we have the upcoming 24 budget cycle. In that we would want to we would want to allocate, again from the 212 fund, the capital improvement fund, a certain amount of dollars for really any combination of these next 3 buildings. We have the salt sand storage shed, we also have the wash bay, and we have the cold storage building. These don't necessarily have to fall in this order. I would say that the prioritization of these 3 buildings would come as we complete the design, as we look at the funding necessities for each one and how they plug in well to each of these next 3 years. Point being is we'd move this project forward and the succession of construction would carry through with each fiscal year's allocations. It's not like we're proposing to build this halfway and then push pause for 5 years and come back to it. This is a plan that would keep the construction flowing over the next 3 years, all the way through 2026, and it gets us a complete project at the end of 2026. So you remember the bottom half of this screen is what I shared earlier on in the discussion. It was the street facility cost estimate and the Wells Fargo dollars with the total amount. The top half of the screen is now simply this spreadsheet here, summarized in the same way as the bottom half. The reason I wanted to lay this out this way is to see the street facility costs, they don't change. They're the same whether we build it standalone or as a city complex.
Director Von Nye, we have a question from Councilman.
Can you blow that up, Heath?
Absolutely. I do have printed copies. So again, the city services center or a city complex, the total cost coming in at $27.9 million. These estimates, I want to emphasize, were established through JLG and RJM, our construction manager at risk. I know our estimates in the past, Chris and I were just talking about this earlier. We had estimates from a few years ago that just completely got blown up after these last 2-3 years worth of results of COVID. So these estimates, I can say, I personally am a lot more comfortable and confident in because of JLG and RJM's work in helping establish them. RJM, of course, is also our CMAR on the Ice Arena project. Some of the numbers that they put into these estimates come directly from the bid results that they got on the Ice Arena. It also comes from a myriad of other projects they help manage throughout the upper Midwest as well. So current day dollars, I think these estimates are sitting pretty comfortably for what the street facility would cost and then what adding the city hall component to that street facility would look like. If I could blow this out just a little bit so I can see both numbers on one screen. This number here, this is just me and my engineering mind comparing numbers. This is pretty telling to me on how entertaining this option sure seems like a good idea, or at least a very feasible idea that could be a great long-term solution for the community. We're looking at $7.7 million to add City Hall to the street facility. If you remember the Wells Fargo remodel, the remaining cost on that with the bid we received was set just under $7.4 million. So you're about a $300,000 split between these two. And in our mind, as we're analyzing this, is for $300,000, we could get an all-new facility without having to worry about scaling back this project, without having to worry about whether we're going to have a council chambers, whether we're going to have enclosed vehicle storage, whether we're going to have the lighting components in the remodel of Wells Fargo, and all the myriad of things that you saw on that big list that we talked about value engineering out.
Director Von Nye, we have a question from Councilman Bueller.
Thanks, Mayor. Heath, what is the square footage for the city hall portion of this facility? Now that would, when you're talking about this, you're talking about including the council chambers as well, correct?
Correct.
What would that square footage be compared to what we would have at Wells Fargo?
So the square footage on the new administration building was roughly 22,000. Now the square footage on the Wells Fargo remodel option, 19 to 20, I want to say, 1,000 square feet.
So you're saying the new would be 21 to 22,000 square feet?
Correct, because of the street administrative functions that would be housed in there as well.
Okay, but if you just sectioned out the portion for the city services part, do we know what that would be? Because I'm trying to compare a little bit apples to apples.
Yeah.
When you're looking at Wells Fargo, that's all in for the city facility.
Yeah.
What would it be out there?
So the city hall remodel was 21,000 overall with a 3,000 square foot addition for the council chambers. So we had 18,000 base square footage for the main floor and basement, and then 3,000 additional square foot for the council chambers. So 21,000 total. With the new facility, it's planned at 21 to 22, somewhere between those two. And of that, we estimate about 4,000 of that would be for street offices. Likely less now because of the shared space. We were programming 4 to 6 for a standalone street administrative function, which included offices for Rob and Sue and Tim and the administrative staff, but also meeting room space, restroom space, and things of that nature. So you could minimize that 4,000 to 6,000 square feet because of the shared spaces in the joint complex, if that makes sense. So of the 21 to 22, I would estimate probably 18 of that is all City Hall, current City Hall function.
Director Von Hy, we have a question from Councilman Tupper.
So by using some of those combined spaces, we're actually saving some square footage or using it more properly, because now we're not designing a conference area in the street department per se, and then one for the, well, if we went into Wells Fargo. So now we're combining those. They're more of a multi-use facility.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a joint facility provides an opportunity for shared efficiencies. So bathrooms, break rooms, meeting rooms. Also, and there's a slide on this further into the presentation, you know, gained efficiencies just through the construction process as well. You're not mobilizing two different crews, things like that. So the square footage, you know, we're budgeting for the 21 to 22,000 square feet. It could be reduced as we get further into the design.
And also the time, maybe just Rob can show me how many times a week do you come up to City Hall, Rob?
Quite often.
Quite often. So there's some more efficiencies that we don't even look at. So.
And again, I want to be fair with this, why I've highlighted this 5.8. This is the bid we received on the Wells Fargo remodel. That is a number based on that bid alone. You know, could that be lower? Absolutely. I recognize that it could be. Could it be lower by rebidding it straight up, the same project? Possibly. Could it be lower by value engineering things out of it? Absolutely. So let's presume we could knock $2 million off this number. So now instead of a $300,000 difference, you're sitting on a $2.3 million difference. And again, I would beg the question, is that 2.3 worth the investment to get everything done that we know we need versus a remodel that may leave us selling ourselves short of what we need for the long-term solution for the community?
Councilman Vilhauer has a question.
Something's not quite clicking with me. As we look, okay, neither one of these figures, the 20 million or the, if I'm looking at the bottom section, or the 7.385 million, neither one of them includes the land cost, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, why aren't we, okay, so we pay what, 1.2 for the sale bar land?
Yeah.
Okay, so why aren't we adding 1.2 to both the top and the bottom onto the 20.19 million? And why are we not adding the 1.3 million on the bottom section for the Wells Fargo building?
The simplest answer I have, Councilman Vilhauer, is that these are costs that would yet to be incurred. We wanted to remove the costs that have already been expended, and just straight up compare what today moving forward would look like for an expense.
I understand that, but there's no doubt that the 1.3 million is a component of, although it's already been incurred, that is a component of our Wells Fargo building.
Correct.
So that would actually increase that bottom section, the Wells Fargo remodel and street facility, by 1.3 million, and wouldn't change the top number, the 27.907 million. So that even swings it the other way. That makes the combined facility less expensive.
And that, sir, is why you were an accountant and I was not.
I mean, am I understanding that right?
I think what you've just described makes sense to me, yeah.
Okay.
No, that's a very good point, Councilman Vilhauer, all joking aside. Yeah, and we can update this accordingly for those considerations. Yeah, what you're saying is this 20 million would uniformly be increased by 1.2 in either scenario, because that's what we paid for the street facility land. This would not see a 1.3 increase for land because it's going on this land. This would see a 1.3 increase because that's what we paid for the city hall property. Very good point. I appreciate that. So with this proposed project, we've put together, penciled in what a timeline might look like if we were to move forward in this direction. That would start as soon as April 3rd, a couple council meetings away. We have a meeting on March 20th, a formal meeting, and then another one on April 3rd. We would anticipate bringing a design contract addendum with JLG forward so that they know we want to move in this direction. That would, of course, take an addendum with their contract to expand their design scope of services for us. And then subsequently, it would likely also include a CMAR contract addendum as well. Sometime here in the spring of 23 would also bring that bond resolution forward, as we talked about earlier. Again, whether that's a $5 million bond or a $7 million bond, that's yet to be determined. There's a few dominoes that have to fall before Kristen would be comfortable making a solid recommendation through the city manager as to what that number might be. So we gave ourselves a little bit of a window there, whether that's April or May, sometime this spring. We'd roll forward with the design all this spring and summer, all into the fall. We would release or anticipate releasing an early bid package. It would just be for the site grading, some excavation and utility work that could be performed yet this year. We do a full-blown bid on the project this winter, whether that's November, December, January-ish, all in the plans to break ground in the spring of 24. And as you saw in that fiscal phasing, that construction would then continue from through 24, 25, and into 26 for all the ancillary structures that would be built out for the street maintenance functionality. Any questions on that timeline? This is a what the debt service, the additional bond that comes into play to perform this project. And again, I think it was Councilman Tupper brought this up early on the presentation. Whether we do a city hall, Wells Fargo remodel and street facility, or whether we do a combined facility, in either case, this bond is necessary to perform both of these projects. So this is a financial spreadsheet that Kristen, Finance Officer Bob Zine, put together, and I'll let her talk through this.
Okay, thank you. So the current spreadsheet that you're looking at, this is the current city debt. So what this does is we're looking at only Fund 212, which is our capital improvement fund, second penny of our sales tax. So as you take a look at this, you'll see the highlighted blue line. 40% debt ratio is kind of where we want to sit, our debt to revenue. So you can see currently where we sit, this has all of our current ice arena bonds, everything, SRF loans, everything that 212 is responsible for paying for. Brings us into about 2029 where we're kind of back to that 40%. When we had our conversations about bonding for the ice arena, everybody was well aware that, you know, it was going to put us a little bit higher than we wanted to be, but it was a project we wanted to do, so we proceeded. So the first spreadsheet just kind of shows current picture. This is where we sit today. The next spreadsheet, what this does is if we were to do, at the time, I only had the $5 million numbers, but you can see it's kind of the purple, violet, right there. Yep. If we were to add $5 million of debt to the city, this is where it kind of brings us. I do want to point out, too, our ice arena bonds, because they were pretty large, we did do those at 30-year. I have suggested that the $5 million only be carried out for a 20-year. That's more of a standard that we try to stick to. So even with doing that, we get back to our 40% debt to revenue ratio in 2031. So it adds just a couple years. I do also want to let the council and the public kind of know this projection, that green column, not the green one, sorry, the one next to it, the projected sales tax revenue. It's a 3% growth, which is a pretty conservative growth. I mean, I have charts on our 5-year averages. So to me, a 3% growth is a pretty conservative estimate right there. The other thing that I would like to point out is when we're doing our debt to revenue ratio on this, I am only considering our sales tax revenue. That is the debt that's required. Is we have to look at what we're taking in our sales tax. We also take in other revenue in our capital improvement fund. We have STP funds that we get from the state that averages between $700,000 and $800,000. Also, some projects sometimes have grant revenue funding So this is purely just looking at that second penny of sales tax for our coverage of our debt. Another piece that the council needs to be aware of when you're looking at this is the very last column. It's your available sales tax revenue after the debt. So that column is what the council, as we're going into 2024's budget, will have to look at to budget for other street improvement projects, some of your recreation improvements. We also do our stormwater flood projects out of that, any public safety improvements. So that column kind of shows the picture of where the council needs to be aware of that number. I will add, though, with that, as I said, no STP fund revenue is in there, so you'll see a little bit of a jump in there. Also, the plan is for the sponsorship agreements and the donations that we're receiving for the ice arena. When council was talking about this and proceeding with the ice arena, one of the things we discussed is that those dollars be set aside and used to help pay down that debt of that last 10 million. So the annual payment you can see is right around 600,000. So as we're getting those agreements in and the donations, that revenue will be set aside to pay that annual bond, which in turn increases what the council will have to go towards future budgets. So those are just kind of the points to make as far as what the picture would look like for the city if we did go out for an additional $5 million run. If it does go up to 6, you know, that's not going to increase it that much. So I think the biggest thing that the council needs to do is to just really look at that last column and kind of see where we sit. The 40% is kind of a standard of where we like to be, but that doesn't mean that's where we have to be when we have some of these bigger projects to complete. So
I would also comment, just as it relates to the additional ice arena bond, cash on hand, we have coverage for 3 years of those debt payments. So that 4289 becomes, 4.9.
Yeah.
It's just not reflected in the chart right now because we haven't made the payments yet.
Councilman Vilhauer has a question.
Actually, a question and a comment. What interest rate are you using on the new bond that we're contemplating?
So I reached out, and we are still currently sitting at about a 4% average coupon on our bonds.
Okay.
So, and part of the reason I think there again that we've stuck at the 4% is going to the 20. You know, anytime you go past the 20 years, you get a little bit higher of an interest rate.
The comment, if I did my math correctly, is, and Manager Mack, you alluded to as well, the column where we'll be making collections on the donations and pledges. If those were to actually come in and we could take out that column, that drops that percentage column by about 10 or 11 percentage points. That brings us a whole lot closer to the 40% that we like to see as a debt service level.
That's correct. And I did have one other piece to add. I did go back and I did about a 10-year average of what we've kind of been spending and also a 5-year average of our street improvements, our storm, our recreation. And when I look at that 5-year average, our street improvements, we were sitting about the 3 to 3.7. Storm is about 600,000, recreation 1.7, and then industrial improvements around 250,000. So I think what that shows is when you kind of look at that last column, what we've been doing and what we kind of want to continue doing is doable. It's just going to take probably in those next 3 to 4 years, really prioritizing what those budgets look like going forward.
I would just add that I think not only I appreciate, I think everybody in the room would appreciate the conservativeness of how Kristen has put this this debt progression, debt retirement spreadsheet together, like these ice arena numbers. With the commitments and the fundraising that has occurred, she knows full well we have to account for that payment, but it's likely once those donations and sponsorships come in that this whole dollar amount, the $600,000, ends up over here, which is exactly what Councilman Vilhauer just alluded to. But also the growth percentage, I'm just summarizing what Kristen already said, but I just truly appreciated her conservativeness in these numbers to show pretty much a worst case scenario, but knowing that this is really truly a lot, likely looks a lot better than this even. So.
Director Von Eye, we have a question, or Councilman Beeler and then Councilman Vilhauer. Councilman Beeler.
Thank you. I guess my question is regarding the CIP, long-term CIP, and there's been a lot of discussion about an East Fire Station and how that would affect us. And I don't recall what we were looking at, what the hope was for that, to do that. I know that's something that's going to have to be addressed. And, you know, I can't guess how much that's gonna cost, but that's something we have to consider as well moving forward. Thanks.
City Manager Mack.
To that point, the East Side Fire Station currently sits in year 4 of the long-term plan. It would be our recommendation, and again, we don't have a site, we don't have hard estimates, but a project like that, we would likely recommend to the council that a general obligation bond be issued for the construction of that facility. But there's a lot of work to do to get there. So that would actually be paid for. It would not be paid for out of sales tax revenue if a GO bond was issued for that.
That would still add debt to the city. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, just to reiterate before I go to Councilman Vilhauer, just for everyone watching and everyone listening, is these are all sales tax bonds. Your taxes are not going up,
That's correct.
okay? Make that abundantly clear. Nobody's taxes are going up. Okay, Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we're being very conservative in the 3%. We've been running at what, 10, 12% this past year. Yes, I'm not about to guarantee that we're going to stay at that pace, but I want to put a number to it. We take in roughly $10 million ballpark for each penny.
Correct.
So going from 3% to 10%, that's an extra $700,000 that we would be taking in if we could maintain our current growth of sales tax that we have been experiencing. But I appreciate that you're doing this at a very conservative level at the 3%.
Thank you. Part of the reason why I put in the 3% is even when we budget, our budgets are normally a very conservative budget too. When you have a fund that relies only on sales tax, which can fluctuate with, right, the economy and the market, I think putting a 3% in is where we can realistically look and kind of get that, I don't want to say the worst case scenario, but yeah, feel that comfort level that we're not shooting for the moon, so.
Councilman Beeler.
Thank you. This is for you, Heath. Is this going to put a lot of strain on us as far as roads, maintenance, construction, all those kinds of things, these budgetary numbers?
Yeah, I think the net effect here is this $370,000 payment that's coming out of this number that's otherwise used on roads and other 212 fund improvements, which includes park and rec improvements and street roadway improvements. So to take that 370 out for this duration, I don't see that as a huge detriment. No, it is a factor, absolutely. You'll see this number on the current situation is really straight line reduced by this payment amount of the 370. So as you come down, your available sales tax revenue, for instance, in years 3, your 5.2 becomes 4.8 instead. But I think with all the other factors we've talked about, if these ice arena numbers get plugged in over here, whether you've made up for this payment already, if the sales tax revenue growth continues like it does, you've more than made up for this payment already, like Councilman Vilhauer just indicated. So given all those factors, yeah, I don't see that being a huge detriment to the.
We have a few people in order. Chair will make a comment before I pass it off to City Manager Mack, then Finance Officer Bob Zine, then Councilman Tupper. Just wanted to say that's a good point for Councilman Bueller made, and that for the public to know is we don't want a shiny new street facility and not have the money to actually maintain the streets. Right. So it would be defeating the purpose of why we're doing it. So thank you for being aware of that. City Manager Mack.
Just a point of clarification as it relates to funding for street projects. These numbers are strictly sales tax revenue. We also receive about $800,000 annually give or take, from the state in STP funds that go directly into street improvements. And that is not factored into these numbers.
Finance Officer Bob Zine.
Thank you, Mayor. The only other point, is right now we sit and we're looking at, the next 30 years. And so the one thing that I will say is in 2020, we did refinance those bonds and we did save $3.7 million. I will also be watching that as the years go on, and anytime I can refinance or make anything callable and save any money, we will be doing that. So this is that 30-year window kind of picture, but anytime we can save money, we will reach out and try to do that.
Thank you for being on top of that as always. Councilman Tupper.
So, Kristen, you're going to be here another 30 years, right? Okay. That's what I heard.
You are on public record saying that.
Yeah. That was not my question. So my question is, with all city buildings, we all have daily costs, whether it be utilities or maintenance or whatever. What fund do those come out of?
That comes out of our general fund.
Okay.
Yep.
So that answered my question. I was trying to think out loud that, with building these new facilities, they're going to be a lot more efficient than the old facilities that we're in now, but that wouldn't affect this part of the budget.
All right. Back to you, Director Von Eyck.
Thank you. These next couple slides are really just a graphical representation of those spreadsheets. Kristen, I don't know if you wanted to touch on them at all, but just another way to represent those previous spreadsheet numbers we looked at.
Yeah, I won't say too much about them. It's just that you can see, I think it's about, is it 2035 there, that it really takes a drop. We pay off our 2020, the Wellness Center bonds, and that, so I think that's just kind of the picture that you're kind of seeing, so.
And then the same for one for the current debt and then one with that additional $5 million bond. So in the summary, we've got a couple slides here. These are some of the realities that Kristen and I and Manager Mack talked through and incorporating here. Again, we're not here to sell something shiny and new to this council. We're simply here to share the information we have at hand to help you as the leading board of this community make an educated decision on what to do next. Some of the points, the realities, the facts of the circumstances we want to point out here. This would be one of the final projects to update existing city government buildings. We've, of course, recently built a new wastewater administration building. We've built a new airport terminal. We've got a fairly new police station. We've got a fairly new fire station. We've got a fairly new library. This really, truly does get the existing facilities all finally updated. Of course, there are new facilities yet that are pending, like Councilman Bueller cited a little while ago, such as an additional fire station on the east side. But this comment pertains to the existing facilities and getting them all upgraded. We wanted to just recognize that this is a forward-thinking decision with prioritized obligations. Really, that goes back to these slides here. If this council decides to move forward with this plan, we are thinking forward in how we are prioritizing and obligating certain things. Some of those things include these next several steps. All the dominoes have to fall for us here to move forward with this project. We need to work on the sale of the Wells Fargo building. We need to work on the sale of this existing city hall structure, selling the sale barn land that's in surplus of what we need for future development out there, the current street facility, and the value that it has and recouping that value. We also have the ice arena bond coverage, those payments of that $10 million bond. We're anticipating being covered through those donations and sponsorships, which folks in this community have been I'm just blown away personally about how hard they've worked on obtaining these donations and sponsorships to help cover that bond payment and the success that they've seen. But getting those finalized and getting those assurances. We are committing future CIP dollars, as you saw with that fiscal phasing of this project. So in years 24, 25, and 26, we would want to move forward knowing that we are committing CIP dollars to make sure we carry this project through to fruition. We are establishing or committing this project as a financial priority. Some of those financial considerations, again, just the realities of the circumstances. Kristen's got a 3% sales tax growth. We've talked about this. That's a pretty conservative number. We're traditionally a lot higher than that on the revenue side, which is a good thing. Economic factors could change those projections. Our 10-11%, as Councilman Vilhauer indicated, might not always be 10-11%. It might dip to 3%, which means we'd be in line with Kristen's projections. Those projections are only based off sales tax revenues. They're not counting our STP funds. They're not counting our grant revenues or other funding revenues. Again, looking at them conservatively.
Director Von Eye, Councilman Vilhauer has a question on what?
Last night at the council meeting, we saw examples of several grants that we are applying for, that we might be eligible or might be getting. Any kind of grants out there for a project of this nature? I see Manager Max kind of chuckling and smiling there.
We've done some research on that. There are grant dollars. We're too large of a community. They cut off as about 20,000 population.
Oh, okay. Well, keep our eyes and ears open, so in case something does come along.
These last two comments, again, kind of just drive home some of the thoughts I was sharing earlier. The options here really before the council, there are several other options, but the two that we're emphasizing in this presentation are we could complete a new city hall facility in conjunction with the street maintenance facility to the tune of a little under $8 million, 7.7. There's no immediate further expenses needed because it's new. No future upgrades or improvements would be necessary for several years there. The other option being we could complete a remodeled facility to the tune of just under $7.4 million. There is a potential there that could be a partial remodel. Again, we may not end up with city council chambers, for example. It's likely this number then would dwindle, would be reduced, which is good. But you might end up with a partial effect of what it is we're going for from a standpoint of a long-term solution for the community's city hall facility.
Councilman Tupper has a question.
So, just thinking back, if we were to stay with the Wells Fargo facility and we would not add a council chambers, where would we hold a meeting?
I thought we were going to do it at your house. No, there could be other options. You know, the event center, the city owns the event center. There's about $500,000 to $600,000 worth of technology upgrades that would need to be made to make that space workable to broadcast and share these kinds of meetings. You know, we can look at other solutions too. That's the most immediate one that I can think of.
Not real efficient though, when everybody has to leave here, drive across town.
That's subjective, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Other city center benefits that we wanted to highlight in going to a city services center. All these city hall needs are met. You got the council chambers, you got the parking, the offices, and it's a new construction versus remodel. The centralized fleet maintenance, you know, that can happen either way, whether City Hall is plugged in over there or not. But I wanted to cite that as to keep that on everybody's radar, that's the direction we're wanting to move in. Consolidating services, you've got three divisions of public works. You got the street division, community development, engineering, all housed in one facility. It's very common and becoming more and more common of communities establishing public works facilities. City of Aberdeen right now is going through siting and scoping of this same type of facility. So not only would we have half of the public works crews housed together, but also all the other city hall services, finance, HR, IT, and city administration with the city manager, mayor, and city attorney. You have the department and division coordination. I can speak from the public works standpoint. These three divisions communicate frequently. You know, Rob Bain, the street superintendent, Brandy Hanton, the community development manager, and Justin Peterson, the assistant city engineer, are often working on plan review meetings and development-related meetings related to street construction, development of streets, and all those things that come to us in those realms. New service administration, how it is we do business. You know, we have a lot of softwares in place now today. A big one that I'll cite is the new building permit software. The reason I'm mentioning this, and we decided to include this, is we have seen a lower level of foot traffic here at City Hall. So really, what's that point for? There may be some concern. You know, if we move City Hall from downtown, what does that do to our foot traffic and the folks that come to City Hall to do business? I just wanted to make the point that the way we do business now has evolved the last few years, and we have seen a reduction in the foot traffic, the people that are actually driving here as a destination to come inside these doors to do business has lessened over the recent past. I showed this in a representation earlier, but it's a geographically centered location there along Highway 20, if you look at the entire city limits of the community. Financial projections. I wanted to emphasize this too. We didn't talk about it a lot on those spreadsheets, but the reserves that the finance officer and this council and past councils have committed to keeping in the 212 fund and in the general fund are kept whole. They're at a safe and confident level that everybody's happy with. We're not dipping into them into a dangerous, diminishing standpoint. Highway 20, we get to help beautify one of the major gateways into and out of our town with this project. If you can imagine from some of those renditions that I shared earlier, like this one, what this would look like, pretty much kitty corner across the highway from our zoo, which again is another beautiful facility, and help beautify that Highway 20 corridor. Economies of scale, this we touched on a little bit earlier, but the conference rooms, the break rooms, the restrooms, 2 standalone facilities, you pretty much have at least 2 of each of those things that you're constructing separately in separate buildings. So we bring these facilities together in one combined comprehensive structure. You have some economies of scale that are gained there. Utility connection costs, you know, the water and sewer connections, things like that, the parking. We don't need to build or repave a second parking lot for a city hall facility. We're utilizing the one that would otherwise, in part, be built for the street facility. Construction economies of scale. Manager Mack alluded to this earlier. You know, you gain some efficiencies in mobilization of a contractor to build all this on one site. The materials, the labor that all goes into this. You're not doing 2 separate autonomous projects. It's all wrapped into one, and you have some economies of scale there.
Director Vaughn, real quick, I had a question on that because when Councilman Vilhauer asked his question earlier about how if you start factoring in like the land costs, then the new facility looks even more appealing. I am not the accountant that Councilman Vilhauer is, but just in looking at the general conditions of a contractor, which I always look at whenever they're on site. So just doing the quick math, to have 2 different general conditions, 2 different contractors, I was just going off a 4% general condition rate. To have 2 different ones, it would cost $40,000 more to have the 2 different sites than it would to have one site. So that is one other argument that you could use for the new facility, is actually $40,000 less expensive to build than 2 separate facilities. That would be the Wells Fargo. So that is just something that I was just doing the math, and it could potentially be more because obviously you have 2 different bids. It could be less too, but obviously I don't think we're going to be, it would be cheaper to have one contractor with general conditions than 2.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mayor. That, of course, is an engineering number that I could have put in here, but I felt like I was already inundating everybody with too much information, so I appreciate you highlighting the specifics there. There's all kinds of construction economies of scale like that number that would come into play. Future expansion capabilities, we didn't really discuss this a whole lot, but these facilities would be designed for future park and rec expansion. The administrative office, where the offices are, the administrative building, would be designed so that we could add on to that in the future. So if 10, 15, however many years down the road, the park and rec needs start to shine through all the more, this facility would take that into account for future expansions. That also includes the heated and cold storage areas. There's a lot of overlap with equipment storage needs for park and rec as there is for the street maintenance division. Current city facilities, you know, we've got the equity and the resale value of those. The other benefit, particularly for this half a block of Wells Fargo and the current City Hall, it takes both those properties and puts them back on the tax rolls. And of course, the intent or hope would be that the sale would occur for a buyer that would want to anticipate using these sites that would bring additional business in the downtown area, whether it be through office buildings or some other form of business function. Representing the community. This is one of those ancillary and one could call subjective benefits, but I do believe it's noteworthy. You look at other communities throughout the state and some of their city hall facilities, whether we do a remodel at Wells Fargo or whether we build new, we're obviously going to be sitting in a better state to truly represent the quality of Watertown. I don't think, and I think most people in the room would agree, we don't do our best at that in this current facility, and so that's another one of those ancillary benefits of this project. Again, no matter which way we go, that's a big improvement in my mind. With that, I'll close out my comments. Of course, share a few pictures. This is the existing street admin offices. This rendition from JLG. It's interesting how they've got a portfolio of sorts on how they established this preliminary design, but it actually took into account some of our recent city logo work and some of the sailboat activities that we see at Lake Kempesca. And anyway, they used the region and some of the architectural aspects, like most architects will do. So I was appreciative of their thoughtfulness in that preliminary design. With that, I'll hand it back over to Manager Mack and can stand by for any questions. Before I do, I really want to thank Assistant City Engineer Justin Peterson and Rob Bain, the Street Superintendent, for their help with the consultants and RJM and JLG in every step along the way as we've considered these alternatives. So very much appreciative of their help.
Thank you. I would just close by providing a couple of comments. First and foremost, we serve the community, and we have to be mindful of that and how we provide services, whether it's at some type of combined facility or two separate facilities. That should be at the forefront. We also are an employer, and we employ a significant number of people, and so if we have an opportunity to provide workspace that is safe and healthy and allows for collaboration and efficiencies, I think that also needs to be taken into consideration when we're talking about these projects. These are big decisions to make. Part of why it's taken so long for us to bring information and recommendations to you all is because we, as staff, feel the weight of those decisions and understand that they can't be made lightly, and understand that they do have implications for the future of the community, not just in a positive way, but it costs money to do these things. But as we've learned with other projects, waiting has not been our friend. I don't anticipate that costs are going to significantly drop, in the next year, the next 2 years. It might reset, but where we're at today is where we're at today. We're available to answer questions and provide any input that you might have, and what I would be looking for out of this meeting, because regardless of which option or idea you all want to move forward with, there's a lot of work to be done on the staff side, is just a consensus of which direction you'd like us to spend our time working on. Clearly no decisions. Decisions don't come until a council meeting and we actually have a contract amendment or a bond or something to make a decision over. But I do need to be able to give direction to my staff on how you want to proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that thorough presentation. I will open it up for discussion. I will allow people in the audience to speak as well during this portion because some perspective outside the council is welcome. I will start opening the discussion with a letter from Councilman Danforth, who is unable to be here today. He is probably listening or watching to us drinking a Mai Tai on a beach in Hawaii at this time. So we are envious, but he wanted his comments to be heard, so I'm going to read them into the record. As this is not my voice for the news outlets here, Please don't record me and say it's my voice, but I could give you a copy of the letter if you wanted to add them to your comments. So this is from Councilman Danforth. I am not able to attend this work session, but want to make my thoughts and opinions known. Therefore, I ask that this email be read into the record so that my fellow council members, city staff, and general public are aware of my position on the street department and city hall projects. I will start off by saying I believe the city hall and street department projects being discussed are both justified and necessary. Both projects come down to defining their priority, defining what we will build, and determining what overall cost we can responsibly afford. While both projects had independent origins, they had evolved into one possible project, and that is the primary reason for this communication. As we all know, the city purchased the former Wells Fargo building with the intention of converting the property into our new city hall. A couple of different design renditions were developed with the final design that included an addition for a new council chambers. When the project went out to bid, one bid was received, and that bid far exceeded cost projections. It was obvious to all involved the bid received did not reflect realistic costs. Efforts were taken to determine if cost reductions could be made or features either delayed or eliminated. Those efforts resulted in minimal cost reductions, some of which brought the integrity of the project into question. At that point, staff was asked by council to come up with options for the City Hall project, and that is where they are at today. The proposed plan for combining a new City Hall with the new street department facility is a viable option for us to consider. My concern, however, is that we, the council and staff, have not conducted responsible due diligence for the Wells Fargo building in 1, understanding exactly what is being planned for and why, and 2, we have not explored alternative methods for having the project bid. The end result is the council is justifying an all-new City Hall for the proposed joint facility based on renovation bid that we know is not clearly understood by the council or staff and represents an unrealistic cost. This in turn makes it appealing to justify an all-new City Hall. A recent walkthrough of the Wells Fargo building with staff, the architect, and Councilman Bueller reinforced these concerns as many design questions went unanswered and all agreed the bid received was grossly unrealistic. It is my opinion that a committee of staff and council members should be assembled to work with the architect to review the design and bid requirements in order to vet what is deemed necessary or needed, and then to look at alternative ways for obtaining bids, quotes that better reflect realistic costs. There is no question in my mind significant cost reductions can be obtained via this plan without adversely affecting the integrity of the final design outcome. If after doing this, the council deems the cost difference between a realistic renovation cost and an all-new facility cost is not enough to justify the renovation, then I can support the proposed joint facility effort. Until and unless this evaluation is done, I feel it is irresponsible for the council to make such an important decision without making the effort to determine realistic costs for the renovation as a comparative. The fact we bid the project and only received one bid, so that is our cost, is not an acceptable justification to me to simply move to the higher cost of building all new. We must determine what options are available to us, and we must pursue those options in order to be in the best position of understanding costs for comparative purposes so that a responsible decision can be made by the council. I do not intend this communication to reflect fault of any council person, the mayor, or any staff. This is simply what I feel reflects a more responsible management approach in dealing with this important city decision and use of taxpayer dollars. Thank you, Councilman Danforth. Thank you from Councilman Mike Danforth, Ward A representative. So, again, that is from Councilman Danforth. He's not here to answer questions regarding it, but by all means, you can comment upon some of his comments if you are so willing. So with that, Chair will open it up for comments. Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I have a lot to say on this issue, and it's not hard to guess where I sit. I've been pretty vocal on this. Going back to the original decision before I was even on council. And frankly, this has been going on since 2016. There was an identified need. We still have that need today. And any discussion on if that bid was bad or not, it doesn't matter because it went through a public bid process. That is the bid we received. That is a number we have to proceed with legally. Even after the discussion of trying to get that lower, we eliminated so much that it was not even feasible to move forward with that. So To me, it doesn't matter if that bid is deemed by certain people to be insufficient or a bad bid. It still went through the legal process. It's a number that we legally have to go by. And yes, we have rejected that bid since then, so we don't know if it's going to be lower or higher. Being in the bid world, I know that there's a lot of things that have fluctuated, and that continues today. It's not. There's a lot of items that won't come back down, and there are items that we've seen increases, and very few items that we've seen actually come back down. So, to me, I think staff has made a great presentation tonight using the numbers that we have been given. So I want to start by saying that, but I also want to stress that we have to give direction to staff and stop wavering on this. It's becoming very confusing and I'm sure frustrating. I know other council members feel the same way too, but we have to protect our staff at some point too, where the frustrations and the confusion, they're busy on a day-to-day basis. This isn't the only thing they're working on. It's one of a million. And if we keep going back and forth and saying we didn't do our due diligence, I strongly disagree. We've had several committees. We've had council members involved. We've had former mayors involved. We've had this mayor involved. We've had our city manager involved. I can continue to go down this list of how many people have been involved in this. And yes, it's unfortunate that we received the bid we did, but that's reality. And now, to me, it makes sense, the direction, well, it's really a no-brainer in my eyes in the direction that we move at this point. But that's not why we're here, is to make a decision tonight, is to try to give some sort of direction. Like Manager Max said, until we have something to act on in the near future. So I just want to stress that we need to give solid direction to our staff.
Mayor.
Thank you. City Manager Mack?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to provide a little bit of context on the bidding process. So for public entities, we are required to bid any public improvement that has a value over $100,000. And that's a cumulative $100,000. So we could get an electrician to come in and say, well, I can renovate this for $50,000. But then somebody may come in and say, well, I'm going to paint for 10 and I'm going to do lighting for 75. You can't bid those separately. Once you hit the $100,000 threshold, it has to be publicly bid as an entire project. So I think there's been maybe a little bit of confusion about that. Well, why don't we do the electric separate? We're not private entities, and those are the state bid laws that we're required to follow. So I just wanted to provide some context on that.
City Manager Mack, just to make it clear, so it's the total cost of the project. So
all parts of the project.
All
yes.
parts of the project. So you can't take one out and get an independent bid. It has to be considered as one whole unit, correct?
Once you hit the $100,000 mark, it has to be considered as a whole.
So in other words, the Wells Fargo renovation would have to be considered as one project.
Yes.
You can't just pick and choose out one aspect or another, correct?
Right.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I
Director?
might, just as an analogy, it's no different than our street repair work. We can't bid the asphalt out separate from the concrete if the project as a whole is going to exceed that $100,000 limit. Just a simple analogy there that falls under that same rule.
Thank you. Councilman Shetty.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I appreciate that clarity, City Manager Mack, because that's one of my thoughts was this process on getting the bid cheaper. There's been different ideas thrown out there. So I do appreciate that insight. Just touching on the bid that we received, and I appreciate the contractor that bid it and did what they could to try to help us in this process to get the Wells Fargo building done correctly. Just a question, I suppose, possibly for Public Works Director Von Eye. the bid, when we get bids in on let's say 3 bids on a project, whatever it may be of this magnitude, are they typically close to each other within a few percentages, or can you save a couple million? Would one be literally 30% cheaper and save a couple million on something like this? Or are they usually typically within a few percentages of each other? I mean, it's maybe a tough question to ask, but just kind of look at a standard, industry standard.
Yeah, I would say you typically would not see a swing of that magnitude of 30 or more percent. Usually you're within single digits. Once you start getting over 10%, there's some. That's when you start looking at the bids real close to make sure there's not an outlier that one of the bidders maybe didn't or missed the mark on for some reason, which we do go through every time we get a bid just to make sure there aren't any errors or omissions in those bids. And if there are, we communicate that with those contractors. So single digits up to 10% is not uncommon, but you get over in the double-digit magnitudes, it starts to be questionable about what folks were looking at and if they weren't looking at apples to apples.
All right, and thank you. I have a follow-up, Mayor.
Councilman Shetty, you have the floor.
So with that, I mean, that just helps to help establish that we have to go with, like Councilman Paulson had mentioned, that is our numbers to go with. Maybe we could shave off a little bit by another bid process, but we can't break it down and try to do it a different direction with a public entity. So that point being said, when it comes to City Hall and renovating City Hall to, a new whatever it may be with the Wells Fargo or the new facility, it doesn't appear in this council we're pretty much in agreement with doing something other than staying in this facility. It appears that we really feel like there's just with public safety for the employees here to the building upkeep to whatever else there may be, we need to move forward with something other than this facility. At least that's kind of been my consensus as I listen to the council here. So if that's the case, we really have to move forward then with one of the two options. I don't even know if we have a third option of staying in this building. I mean, that's always an option, but I mean, it doesn't appear that that's where we're at. So with the two options we're talking about tonight, then that's what we got to look at is well, just looking at the numbers. And I do appreciate the staff, everyone's due diligence, because actually a handful of questions I had as I just kept listening through the night. Oh, there's that answer. Oh, there's that answer. I was thinking expansion. Is there room for expansion? You answered that on one of your last slides. So you have definitely thought out the way it looks. A lot of these, pretty much no rock unturned, if you will. So I do appreciate that. So anyway, that's just helping me clarify a few things in working through the thought process.
Councilman Tupper.
First off, I want to thank two council people that originally put in a lot of work with the Wells Fargo when the building was purchased, and that's Councilman Bueller and Councilman Vilhauer. They were very diligent in working on that project, and they put a lot of time and effort into it. And unfortunately, in my opinion, well, part of it is because of the situation we're in with the environment we're in. It came in way too high. I want to thank the staff for everything they put into this, because common sense tells me when we're looking at just a touch over 1% to go into a brand new facility compared to a 40 or 45-year-old facility, that we're not going to fix everything that needs to be fixed. We'll put some of it off for a little while. Common sense just tells me to be a good steward of the taxpayer dollars, which we all should be. That's the common sense rule that we should go after the new facility. Whether or not there's any hope for the Wells Fargo building, in my eyes, probably not. And there again, due diligence that was put into it is much appreciated. I think, we've taken enough time for Kristen and her staff in the finance department to look at this, and can we afford it? And I think that's we've always been very conservative, which I love about the city of Watertown. From the staff, I look at so many more efficiencies that can go into a more of a centralized building. Just being there, do work. Like you say with Public Works. It's just going to make it so much more efficient, and there's efficiencies down the road that we can't even think of. But I know where my heart would stand in this. If I was building a house, and I had a house I was going to remodel or one I could build, and it was only going to cost me a little over 1% more to build a brand new one, it wouldn't take a whole lot of thought to decide that the brand new one would be a little bit better decision. So, in trying to be a good steward of the, like I say, the taxpayers' dollars, I think that would be the way that I would have to lean at this time, unless something would change with the Wells Fargo facility. And thank you for everybody your hard work.
Thank you. I would also like to reiterate what Councilman Tupper said. We are fortunate to have two councilmen who were intimately involved in the design of the Wells Fargo rebuild, and that's Councilman Beeler and Councilman Vilhauer. And I trust both of them. I know that I've heard a lot of stories about those meetings and how long they were and how often they were and how many there were. And I trust their ability to speak on behalf of the city of Watertown, so I thank them. So I trust the design that was brought forward. So as far as like possibly saving money off of a redesign, that would be basically me saying I don't trust Councilman Beeler or Councilman Vilhauer, which I do. So now whether or not the bid could be rebid and save some money, but that's a different argument. But redesigning it, I've got to trust the work that was already put into it by my good friends and trusted council members. So any other comments? Councilman Beeler.
I've put in my 2 cents worth here, I guess. Everybody else is, so I better. You know, I got it, and I appreciate your gratitude. I really do. And Glenn did a lot of work in that regard as well. But I just want to say that my concern with this whole thing, and I want to say first off, I'm not glued to the current bank building. I mean, because we did that, because we had a lot to do with that, you know, if it makes sense to do something different, I'm all for it. My concerns, first off, number one, is can we afford it? That's the other thing. Now, and originally too, we were thinking, is this the right time to do this? Maybe it isn't. You know, I don't know. Those are big questions. Okay, can we afford this? And what other services are going to suffer because we spend these dollars on this facility? Well, we're going to spend money one way or the other. It's going to be there or out at the new facility. I will make a couple of comments. I know we did get bids, and Colin, I understand what you're saying about the bid. The bid was rejected. We could get this rebid, and the biggest concern I had, and I think Mike as well, after we had an opportunity to walk through that facility, and in the last 2 weeks I've walked through it again. I did it with some other folks too that are in the construction business. And just to kind of get an idea of how it could possibly cost, $3.75 million to do the renovations. Now, this doesn't include the city council chambers or the enclosure for the vehicles, but the internal part of this. I mean, you could build 10 really pretty nice houses for the cost that they were projecting in that bid. I just don't think it was a very good bid environment. I kind of think it was hastily done. I feel like I agree with Mike in the sense that to be responsible, we probably need to look at another go at this thing, just to get a better idea what the actual. I mean, folks, we look at some of these costs. I'm just picking a few out from that bid. Paint, it's mostly wood in there. Paint was $107,000 to paint that building. Electrical, over $700,000. And I don't recall what electrical had to be replaced in there. An HVAC system, we were told we needed an air handler, and as I recall early on, I thought it was in that between $40,000 $80,000 for an air handler. They've got that at $363,000 for an air handler because we would have more people in the building. And just earthwork and asphalt was almost $300,000. You know, some of those things just don't seem realistic to me. I mean, I've been involved in the construction industry in my life, and holy smokes, $3.75 million to renovate that. You walk through and you look at what we actually have to do, and you really got to scratch your head. And I will say this, from all the looking and all the discussions we've had on that building, the bones are good in that building. It's a solid building. It's been well taken care of. There's some minor blemishes, obviously, throughout the woodwork, those kind of things that need to be fixed, but it's a nice building, and it is still downtown. So those are just some concerns that I've got. I'm not glued to this. If it makes better sense. And if there's not, I mean, even if it's another, if we could save $1.5 million on the building downtown, it might still make sense to move into the new facility. But as long as we make fiscal sense, and we're not going to have a lot of our city services suffer, because make no mistake, we use these dollars to build things, whether it's a GO bond or it's a capital expenditure bond, a revenue bond, I should say. We're still taking money away from other services when we do these things. Let's make that clear. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. Something's going to suffer because we're going to use that money. And hopefully that's not the case. That's why I brought up the question earlier, Heath, as to if there are going to be issues with roads and parks and so forth. So these things I'm just a little concerned about, and I have confidence in Kristen in how she feels. I mean, I hope she's given us the straight skinny on where we're going to be if we go this direction or that. But I just think, folks, from my standpoint, to see one more time just to get an idea of what the true costs could be for the Wells Fargo building, I would appreciate if we had that opportunity to do that. So that's all I have to say about that.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'd like to start my comments off by, yes, Bruce, we worked a long time on this, and I appreciate all the effort. You put a lot more time in it than I did, so I appreciate your effort in this. Appreciate the kind words, Mayor and Councilman Tupper. Want to thank the staff. I mean, when we reject the bid, we turn the ball over to you, come back to us with options. And you have put an awful lot of work into this, and that is very much appreciated. I'll say this, 2 years ago, I was very frustrated. We were almost ready to go out for bids 2 years ago in the Wells Fargo building. I was very, very frustrated, and those that were on the council at that time, as well as new council members, knew my frustrations that we put the stop on for various reasons, put the stop on that project. I was not happy about it. I thought we had a great facility there, but in hindsight now, I've got to say I have definitely changed my heart on that. Between what the cost came in a lot higher than we were expecting, but then when we threw in the discussion about the street department facility and combined the two facilities, and the efficiencies that we could realize by combining those facilities, that was the game changer for me. When I could see that, hey, we can accomplish a whole lot more if we combine these facilities rather than each one, rather than the facility for each purpose being built. And when we start to analyze the costs now, very little difference. In fact, if we look at the numbers, it's actually probably cheaper to combine have a combined facility rather than two, remodeling Wells Fargo as well as building a new street department facility. So but that was a game changer for me, as the efficiencies that we were going to realize by combining the two facilities. So that's where I'm standing this. The longer we wait and twiddle our thumbs in this to make up our mind, all the more it's going to cost us. After picking our finance officer's brain on this a number of times, I'm comfortable with moving forward financially on this. And again, the longer we delay, the more it's going to cost us. So I say let's move forward. I remember one of the opening comments, one of the very first meetings that we had with TSP when we were designing this. We were asked by the lead architect, "What do you want out of your city hall?" And I made the comment, I want a facility that our community can be proud of that shows off Watertown. Wells Fargo at the time, in my opinion, could have done that. Now as we look at what options are on the table, that we're still going to have a facility that we can be proud of to showcase to the community when it's all said and done.
Councilman Schutte.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and actually I just want to comment too. I concur with Councilman Vilhauer and others. I remember when we have major events in our life, we kind of remember where we were. Not to compare this to some major events, but I remember when I got the phone call about this new thought about having a combined facility like this. I remember right where I was like, that immediately was like, that is such a great idea. I'd never even thought about that until it was proposed to us. And so since day one of this new direction, I've been very open to this direction with a newer facility that's put together like this. Granted, the numbers, where are we at with the numbers? That's why I do appreciate this. We're working through the numbers. We've been working with the finance department, pros and cons, and yes, I'm concerned, like Councilman Bueller, and you did touch on it, Mr. Von Eye, on the street road, just keeping our street upkeep, things like that. Things will be tighter for a few years the way it sounds, but with a lot of these capital improvement projects being pretty much done except for potentially the fire hall, I do see the potential of this working out. You know, if all goes well, I guess, with the economies and in the next decade. So anyway, just on that vision though, I am for the vision of having a combined facility like this. And just another little fun fact, with the top picture of City Hall there and the Wells Fargo in the background, it is a red light, not a green light for the Wells Fargo building back in there in that picture. So,
City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to provide an additional point of clarity as we talk about street projects, future projects. The numbers for these options are what they are, and they're, you know, virtually the same. We cannot move forward with a combined facility or a rebid and remodel of Wells Fargo and a standalone street facility without issuing a bond. So the impact to future projects is the same, whether you do a joint facility, the City Services Center, or we rebid and remodel Wells Fargo and do a standalone street facility. And I don't want the conversation to be, well, it's going to hurt more if we do new, or it's going to hurt more if we do a remodel. The impact is the same. It's, you know, we got 4.3 million to work with for future projects in 23.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? I know I have one. Councilman Bueller.
I do have one comment. Amanda, the reason I brought that up was if we could save, if there was a way that we could take a couple $1 million out of that project, that makes a difference. It makes a difference in what funding we have available for those things. I understand that. I understand that the way it sits right now, it's pretty much a wash, and it's still going to cost that much money. I get that, but that was the reason I brought that up. Thanks.
Thank you. Two questions I think I know the answer to, but I want them on record. So, Director Von Eye, so let's say you had touched upon the numbers for Wells Fargo. I just want to make it clear to the council and the public that we're not out that money. We're basically just transferring the money that we would have spent on Wells Fargo to the new facility. We're not losing money. We're not losing taxpayer money. Obviously, we will lose the cost that we paid for the architect. But all of the other money, we're not losing the money. So I don't want people to think that we blew a bunch of money. We're just transferring it to the new facility. Would that be the correct way of looking at it?
Yeah, exactly, Mayor. And I scrolled back to this chart here, this spreadsheet. This 7.3 is entirely rolled into, or would entirely be rolled into, what it would cost to plug the new City Hall into the street facility project.
Yeah, and granted, that means that we would have to sell the Wells Fargo building, but we have had interest from multiple people already. So the other thing I want to make clear is, now I know in the public's mind, of the two, the street department is something that they're going to get behind much more than a city hall, simply because everyone drives the streets. Not everyone uses this. It comes into City Hall. So I want to make it clear. Going forward with this joint facility, we are not skimping on the street department at all. We are still getting everything that we want and everything that we originally wanted, correct?
Yes. I mean, if you look at both, the number is the same. So same square footage if it's standalone versus a joint facility, same site development. If we factor in the land cost, right? So it's 22 million all the way through.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Bueller.
Thanks, Mayor. I want to say thank you to all of you folks. I know you've put in a whole bunch of time on this thing. This took a lot of work. I know it did, and I followed this all the way through. And so I just want you to know all that you've done is appreciated.
Councilman Tupper.
Correct. Is there any place in this, we're going to use 15 acres, correct? Out of the 27 acres. So we got 12 acres. We're doing a little possible alliance swap with some individuals that own or buying the restaurant part. Is anywhere in there been figured out if we were to sell the other rest of the 12 acres? That's not figured into any of these numbers, correct?
The sale of that surplus land that I've been referring to it as that we would not be using is taken into account on the revenue side of one of our spreadsheets here to the tune of about $500,000. That 15 acres, I'll say too, is approximate. We need to fine tune that. I want to make sure that Rob's got the space he needs for stockpiling and storing materials, and so we might end up with 16, 17 acres, but whatever that remnant is
That is figured into those numbers.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I do just want to point out, Councilman Villauer said something about the timeline and making sure we're kind of moving forward in some fashion. And I do want to point out the ice arena too. The longer we waited, that cost over doubled actually from estimates that we were seeing just 5 years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So the longer we wait, we have a history of costs significantly increasing, and I don't think we can wait much longer and fool around with some things. So,
Councilman Tupper.
Just to kind of coincide with what you just said, Councilman Paulson, there's a gentleman in the audience, Mr. Foley, that I remember about 6, 7 years ago had an idea to build an ice arena that was about $17 million, if I remember right. And that got kicked down the road long enough that we're now into a $36 million ice arena. So that tells you what happens when things get kicked down the road. And I think it's time to move forward with this. So,
Thank you. Before I say something, does anyone have any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. I want to thank the staff for bringing this forward. We've got a lot to consider. Anybody in the audience have any comments? Councilman, Mr. Foley?
I can never aspire to be a council member because I live in the county.
Not everyone can be perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, council. I wanted to make a couple of points. I'm not going to go into the numbers, the timeline, that type of thing. You've got the experts that have spent their careers working on this type of thing, and I appreciate what they've done. But I just wanted to make one small comment, and I know from a lawyer that might seem unusual, but the point that I want, sorry, Lisa, the point that I wanted to make was initially when the Wells Fargo building was proposed, I thought, eureka, that's genius. I go back into my family history. My great-grandpa at the Diamond Vogel store, where Dan used to manage, that's where his blacksmith shop was. And then his livery stable was back. And then he built the block where it's called the Foley block that the Woolworths building was in, that some of us with gray hair know about, and then the Gather. Grandma used to tell us that if we shopped at the mall, we were taking money out of her mouth. Downtown was where things needed to be. And I believed that, and it was drilled into me by Grandma, my grandpa, my dad. This idea of something out on Highway 20 is game-changing. I think what you are doing, if you go in that direction, will open up Watertown, just like some of the other actions that you've taken with the rec center, with the ice rink. West Watertown has been neglected in certain aspects by some of the decisions that not you, but the community's made. And this is a chance for us to put that back into West Watertown, which, as Heath points out, is Central Watertown. But so to me, I appreciate the sentiment that, for those that might think that City Hall needs to be downtown. To me, whatever makes sense for efficient and effective operation is what really makes sense to me. And so I applaud you for looking at the proposal that was made, and I appreciate you for thinking outside the box for the future of Watertown. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Just want to say that's a really good point, because we have, as a city, put a lot of money into the east side of Watertown. We've put a lot of money into downtown. We love both those locations. We love all of Watertown equally. In this case, we have an opportunity of perhaps revitalizing a portion of Watertown that has been overlooked for a while, and also with our new airport, people coming in from that area will have a wonderful look at Watertown. So I don't want to cut anyone off, but I just will have a final comment that just to say I'm in favor of this proposal. It seems like a good proposal to me. I agree with what other council members said before me about the economy of scale, both in construction but also in the efficiency of running the building, and also the cost of waiting. There's also a cost in waiting that is not even monetarily speaking, but also the attitude and the perception and the identity of our town. It's an intangible, but to me it's real. It's the attitude of everyone in town as far as what are we as a city? What are we going to be? In this case, a bold vision for a multi-generational solution. That's what I get behind on this. This isn't just a 10-year fix or a 20-year fix. I'm not saying anything against the Wells Fargo building, but it is a 50-year-old building. This is a building for generations to come. So long after I'm gone, hopefully this will be providing great service for the citizens of Watertown. That's a cost that you can't put a number on, but it is real in the public and who we are as a city. And as everyone knows, that's what I'm behind, a vision for the future of Watertown. Love this community. I want other people to love it as well. And when we show it by our thinking and our votes, we free up other people to do likewise with their businesses. So the generational solution of this is something that excites me. So thank you. I know we got a lot of work to do, and there's got to actually be votes, but thank you for bringing this forward, and we've got some work to do. City Manager Mack, you can close it out.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder of the timeline that we've established. So we will have a public information meeting this Thursday at 6 p.m. at the police station's community room. So it's likely to be the same presentation, and we may tweak a few things. We may update the numbers based on Councilman Vilhauer's comments. From there, we have a work session that is already scheduled for the 13th. We have some other topics, but it would be an opportunity if anyone from council wanted to talk about this even further. The next action, or the first action that you all can debate and make a decision on, would be an amended contract with JLG and RJM and all of the other letters of the alphabet to design, to move into design of a city services center. So that we're anticipating for the April 3rd council meeting. And there's plenty of time between now and then if you all want to have more public conversations, if you want to meet with staff, if you want to have small group meetings, we're here to accommodate that however you want us to. I do think it's important to know we met with a group of downtown business owners today. I don't speak for them. I'm not going to pretend to do that. To talk about this and also parking, because we can't just focus on one thing. We have a lot of stuff. And the general sentiment was positive. But largely, the sentiment is whatever you do, do it right and make a decision and get it done. And I think that's a fair comment and an assessment from them. But also for the public, you know, we're here to answer questions and talk through ideas and any information you may want. Myself, Heath, Kristen will make ourselves available however we need to, because we do understand this is a large decision to make. And with that, we thank you for your time and your diligence, and we look forward to the public information session on Thursday.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned that, so I will open it up for public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to the council about something that is not on today's agenda? I'll close public comment. There is no reason to go into executive session tonight. Therefore, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilman Villauer, seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Good night and God bless you, Watertown.